High above the earth, secluded in a tower that touched the sky, lived a young girl named Rapunzel. Her beauty was renowned, though none had ever laid eyes upon her, for she was a prisoner, held captive by a powerful sorceress. Taken from her parents as payment for their crime of theft, Rapunzel had never known the world beyond the cold stone walls of her tower. Her only companion was the sorceress, who visited by climbing the long golden braid that cascaded from Rapunzel's window. The girl had known no freedom, no friendship, until the day the prince stumbled upon her song. Hidden deep within a desolate part of the kingdom, the tower stood like a solitary monument, its shadow stretching across the barren landscape. One day, while riding through the area on a hunt, a young prince was drawn to the sweet melody drifting down from above. The sound was unlike anything he had ever heard, soft and haunting, filled with sorrow yet laced with hope. Curiosity piqued, he searched for the source of the voice, until he found the tower standing alone against the darkening sky. Concealed in the underbrush, the prince watched in awe as an old woman called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." In response, a golden braid tumbled from the window high above, glistening like sunlight. The sorceress climbed the braid effortlessly, vanishing into the tower's upper chamber. The prince stayed hidden, waiting until nightfall. As the moon rose, casting a pale glow over the land, he approached the tower and, recalling the words of the sorceress, called out to Rapunzel. To his amazement, the golden braid appeared once more, and with it, the prince began his ascent. When he reached the chamber, he was greeted not by the sorceress, but by a girl of breathtaking beauty. Rapunzel, startled but intrigued, asked, "Who are you? You are not the sorceress." The prince, equally captivated by the girl before him, replied softly, "I am a prince, drawn here by the sound of your voice. I had to meet the one who sings so beautifully." Rapunzel's heart fluttered. She had never seen a man before, never spoken to anyone other than the sorceress. Curiosity turned to wonder, and before long their meetings became frequent. Each night the prince would return and the two would talk for hours. What began as innocent companionship soon blossomed into love. But the sorceress, unaware of their secret meetings, remained the ever-watchful warden of the tower. Rapunzel, fearful of the sorceress's wrath, kept her love hidden. Yet as the days passed, she noticed a change in her body. Her gowns grew tighter, her stomach swelled, and a deep fear crept into her heart. Rapunzel tried to conceal her condition, but as the months went by, it became impossible to hide. One morning, the sorceress arrived as usual, calling for Rapunzel to let down her hair. As she climbed into the chamber, she noticed Rapunzel's distracted demeanor, the way her hands rested protectively over her stomach. Suspicion clouded the sorceress's mind, and her eyes narrowed. "What is this?" she asked, her voice sharp and probing. Panic gripped Rapunzel, and in her innocence, she replied without thinking, "I don't know, but my dresses have been getting so tight lately. The prince says it's a sign of something beautiful." The words escaped her lips before she realized her mistake. The sorceress's face twisted in fury, her eyes blazing with hatred. "The prince!" she spat. "How dare you betray me?" With a snarl, the sorceress seized Rapunzel by her golden braid. In one swift motion, she drew a dagger from her cloak and slashed the hair from Rapunzel's head, severing the girl's connection to the outside world. Rapunzel cried out in horror, clutching at the uneven strands that remained. "You fool!" the sorceress screamed. "You think you can hide your sins from me?" Rapunzel sobbed, but her tears did nothing to soften the sorceress's wrath. With a cruel smile, the sorceress banished Rapunzel to a desolate wasteland, where she would give birth to her children in isolation, far from the tower and far from the prince. That evening the prince returned, calling for Rapunzel as he always did. But instead of her sweet voice, It was the sorceress who lowered the golden braid she had kept as a cruel trophy. Unaware of the trap, the prince climbed up, his heart filled with hope at the thought of seeing Rapunzel again. When he reached the top, he was greeted by the sorceress's mocking laughter. "Looking for your dear Rapunzel," she taunted. "You'll never see her again." Shocked and devastated, the prince backed away toward the window. The sorceress's laughter echoed in his ears, driving him to the edge of madness. In a desperate attempt to escape, he turned to flee, but the sorceress was faster. With a cruel push, she sent him plummeting from the tower. He fell into the thorny bushes below, the sharp thorns piercing his eyes and leaving him blind. The prince, now sightless, wandered the forest for years, calling out for Rapunzel, but hearing nothing but the rustling leaves and the distant howls of wolves. In the wasteland, Rapunzel gave birth to twins, alone and afraid. Her once melodic voice became hoarse from her endless cries, and her spirit withered under the scorching sun. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, and as her children grew, so did the bitterness in her heart. The hope that the prince would find her slowly faded with each passing day. Anger replaced the love she once held, and Rapunzel began to resent the prince for abandoning her in her time of need. Her children, once symbols of love, became reminders of her entrapment and despair. But in the depths of her loneliness and pain, a new power stirred within her. On a stormy night, when the wind howled like a beast, Rapunzel stood at the edge of the wasteland, staring into the darkness. Her tears, once pure, now carried the weight of her suffering. With a scream, she unleashed her anguish into the night, and something ancient and malevolent answered her call. From the shadows emerged a twisted figure, gnarled and cloaked in dark magic. It whispered promises of revenge, of power, of freedom from her pain. Desperate and broken, Rapunzel accepted the offer without hesitation. The creature bestowed upon her a dark gift. Her golden hair returned, but now it was black as the night, a living, writhing entity that responded to her will. Her voice, once sweet and soft, now carried the weight of a curse. With her newfound power, Rapunzel set out to reclaim her life and punish those who had wronged her. Years passed, and the prince, still blind and wandering, heard a familiar song carried on the wind. It was Rapunzel's voice, but there was something darker, something sinister in its melody. Desperate and weary, he followed the sound, stumbling through the wasteland until he saw her. Rapunzel stood before him, but she was no longer the girl he had once loved. Her hair, long and black, twisted and coiled around her like serpents. Her face, once filled with light, was now hardened by years of suffering and bitterness. "Rapunzel!" the prince called out, his voice trembling with both fear and hope. She turned to face him, her eyes cold and unforgiving. "You left me," she hissed. "You let me suffer." The prince fell to his knees, reaching out blindly. "I never stopped looking for you," he pleaded. Rapunzel's laugh was hollow, devoid of warmth. "Lies," she whispered as her hair snaked toward him, wrapping around his throat like a noose. "You abandoned me. Now, you will pay." As the prince gasped for air, Rapunzel's hair tightened its grip and his body began to turn to stone. His final breath escaped him as his form solidified, forever frozen in a moment of agony. Rapunzel stood over the stone statue, her eyes glowing with dark magic. The wasteland, once her prison, was now her kingdom. And her song, though hauntingly beautiful, would forever lure the lost and the desperate to their doom. In the end, it wasn't the sorceress who had won. It was Rapunzel, twisted by her pain, who had become the true villain of the tale. The tower had once been her cage, but now she was its queen.
Thank you for joining us in the world of Twilight Fables. If you enjoyed this tale and want to hear more stories like this, please subscribe and hit the notification bell for more.